Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I'm here in this lovely new... Oh, Matt, we forgot to...
We got the remote right
remote
here.
right
Hold
here.
on.
Yeah, Matt's
We'll do
gonna
this
that.
live.
And boom.
Ooh.
Now I feel
Okay.
ready. Yeah, that blue light, that vibrant light. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Now we've got our Flowline. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got our Flowline light up to make it legit here in the new studio. And another great addition today, Matt, we've got our chairs.
Yes, they're comfy.
They are very comfy. They're like a navy blue. They kind of fit the theme of our, blue-ish color scheme, along with our beautiful white table here, which I feel like this will be the next upgrade.
I have a strong feeling that this table,
the centerpiece here,
may get replaced here, but
yeah. Are you in favor of a couch, or do you like the formal table setting?
I think I kind of like the table for notes and that sort of thing. But I don't know. All the cool kids, I guess now it's more like couch.
Yeah,
whatever.
that's true. And then some have it's like they kind of facing each other sometimes with like a nice fireplace background, which I don't know if that'll fit here, but but then Rogan I think is still very table setting style. So anyway, maybe we make up our own style, because again I think that would be kind of neat. We typically do that. We sort of set the trends and all
Pretty
that,
much.
I feel like.
Yep.
Right? Well, good. Well, speaking of trends, Matt, I thought it'd be good. We kind of talked about that is sort of once a month, just kind of give an update on rig count and, kind of any observations we see. Certainly not, deep dive analyst style, but I mean, again, we live in the drilling fluid world and we live and die by cutting sacks at the hopper. And in order to do that, we need a rig that's actually drilling.
Yes.
So, it's a metric that we pay attention to with regards to rig count, and then kind of where things are going. It's just sort of talking to customers. Obviously with a large customer base, we have a pretty good pulse of what things are doing now and where people may go. But it's just kind of like, hey, month, here's rig count, and kind of where things are at, and then we can kind of dive into the topic for the day, Matt. So why don't you go ahead and just share what's rig count doing right now, buddy?
I mean, it depends on what your yardstick is, so down a couple of rigs at 590 per, the latest that I was able to pull up, which is still down 30 year on year. I think the story remains that like natural gas is our hope for more drilling. And so, I follow a number of different folks on Twitter. Like all this stuff is things you could look into more detail yourself if it interests you.
Sure.
But gas storage in Europe has been this conversation of like, when are they going to have a cold winter and draw down their storage and actually need more LNG?
Yes.
Well, they need to refill their storage. They used a lot of it. And so that's one conversation. The other one is, trade is a little dicey, and with China in particular, and they haven't bought an LNG cargo in 2 months. That was a headline I read today. And so it's like, well, they haven't done that in a long time. So it's like they're specifically avoiding doing business with us, which, you never know when exactly these episodes are going to come out, right? But given how chaotic the past week or so has been on tariffs and that sort of thing, understandable.
Right.
And then in the midst of all this, OPEC announced another output increase. There's depending on who you talk to, one argument is, okay, well, all that oil, the thing is, in the Middle East, because oil is so cheap, during warmer months to power AC and everything, they burn oil. They don't. So, like, they're just increasing output, but they're going to consume it all. The other argument is they're trying to punish Kazakhstan, which is an OPEC member that has exceeded its production somewhat consistently and, made them mad. But
right.
I think the big arc, at least that I am picking up from, the news outlets and the Twitterati is just, gas is still the story of how badly people need it and when they need it. And we have this growing capacity, these LNG trains coming on that could create more opportunities for us to produce more gas and make it available to the rest of the world to use.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a really good macro take, and for those who maybe follow along, like Matt had mentioned Twitter a few times. It's people might laugh and say, oh, getting news from social media, but the reality is there's a lot of credible folks out there that do put almost real time information and factual information out on Twitter. So it's not Matt doom scrolling TikTok looking for his next best headline read. There's lots of good information, but real quick, Matt, on the China thing, that's interesting. Do you have any rough idea of how much they would buy typically? Like you said, they hadn't bought a cargo in 2 months. Is this like a huge drop in demand from us, or like is it?
I mean, honestly, for me, sort of just following, when someone would say, "Oh, hey, they bought another cargo," um, it wasn't like they bought one a month or something, but they bought enough consistently that it was that like to go 2 months without buying anything is noteworthy.
Sure.
A lot of our stuff goes to Europe. A lot of it, chases sort of spot markets and goes where, to the highest bidder. But, China has sort of been set up as possibly a very significant trade partner in natural gas. So, an opportunity there. And, a lot of the LNG terminals possibly that are, they're going into Mexico on the West Coast there, Argentina putting one in, not having to go through the Panama Canal, Canada, just having Alaska, for that matter, looking at having opportunities to be able to ship directly across the Pacific. Anyways, so I mean, I think that's sort of the big elephant in the room right now is all this trade stuff, right? Like nobody knows what's going on. I mean, it's one of those everybody's hoping it'll be like, haha, just kidding, and
Right.
but the fact that nobody knows is either the most brilliant tactic ever or the most terrifying lack of strategic methodology, one could conceive.
Yeah.
So, or fail to conceive, I guess.
Yeah.
But, anyways, I think that's a big part of the story right now.
Of course. No, and I guess tying it back to, like rig activity, and again, for those locally here in the US, it's you want a lot of oil and gas demand to be able to hopefully drive prices enough to where there's lots of rig activity. And so, right now with a lot of the uncertainty and the craziness, when you look at, well, what does that do to oil and gas? There's one, and I'm going to keep it very simple, is like one side of the camp saying, it could be, it could cause a recession. And when a recession happens, it typically means that there's not a lot of activity happening in manufacturing and buying. And so that reduces demand for oil and gas, which then reduces prices. And then we're left with possibly less activity, less rigs, and hoping to salvage what we can. And then on the flip side, you know, if you drive demand by consuming more and buying more, and let's just say, I don't know, the end result is that oil and gas demand goes up, well, then that's good. But right now, I think there's a little bit more pessimism. So one could say, well, if that's the case, then we're not going to have a huge jump in rig count anytime soon. And so I'm not holding my breath for like a major increase in rig activity. Next week, that could change depending on more Twitter feeds. Who knows? But as it stands right now, rig count's kind of flat and the outlook is fairly flat-ish.
Yes, and yeah, I mean, people are trying to have their expectations, and all of them could change with the markets going down and all these other things, right? Like tomorrow could be very different than today, but that's the story of our lives. This one is a bit stranger because I think when we've gone through the pandemic, for example, nobody really knew when, right? Like everybody knew we're going to snap out of this, but nobody knew when, and so this is sort of it was induced through an intentional set of actions that can be undone.
Sure.
And so the question is it like, haha, just kidding, or what? But yeah, I think, hopefully we have a better sign of what's to come and a better sense of stability soon. And hopefully it doesn't, be as miserable as other economic downturns have been.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Right. I guess the last thing I want to add, and this is just conversation, and I wonder if, if things do go south even more than they are, if you're into the stock market, you're obviously seeing a lot of red. I wonder if it spurs a little bit of M&A, because companies that are maybe sitting on a bunch of cash, maybe ready to buy up someone who's lost like a ton of enterprise value or just the value of their company because the stocks have just all like plummeted. So I wonder if there might be some cool or sort of good headline coming up where some company might be bought because of this. I don't know. Any sort of thoughts around that?
I mean, I'm sure there's a chance of it, right? When you're healthy and another company isn't as healthy, you can take advantage of the situation, right? This is why people try and like move their cash to the sidelines when things
Sure.
become a little uncertain. And so, that's a big question with the oil field, right? Like, because financing was so difficult for so long, a lot of oil and gas companies paid down all their debt.
Yeah.
And so maybe they have the freedom to do some things. Um, who knows?
Yeah, I know you'll hear a lot of who knows, right? Because again, the crystal ball is, as your friend Josh Young would say, it's often gets shattered. But it's good conversation, and so if anyone out there has any sort of thoughts on where things are going, amuse us, please, because nobody really knows. But anyway, so moving on, Matt. Topic of the day, something you brought up, and why don't you go ahead and kick this off, and then we'll keep moving on.
Yeah, I think we've had some pretty interesting conversations with a lot of folks lately, and this is a very typical thing. I want to be very upfront and say I think this is all just human nature, but with human nature comes some things where I feel like it's really good to take a step back and think through a problem, and also challenge what we think we know. Because I think as mud guys, our frustration is whenever there's a problem and you can't think of what it is, it must be the mud, right? What can we do about the mud to fix this? And we've found ourselves in situations where, a bit is, coned out, and it's, well, what can we do with the mud? And it's like, I don't think this was a mud problem. And so I think there's a really healthy process from an engineering standpoint that we can go through and say, and rule things in or out, or at least acknowledge what we can't be certain of. And the other part of it is we're just not taking advantage of a lot of the data that we have. And so,
Could you give like any examples, like about you mentioned the data?
EDR data. I think just we're. I think generally the narrative I see is, it could be related to a whole problem, it could be related to a BHA problem, it could be related to whatever, is something happens, it's not entirely obvious what it is, or the directional company would like it to be a mud problem, or we couldn't see anything specifically wrong when we came out of the hole, the BHA looked fine, or we had trouble getting back in the hole,
Yeah.
and therefore, what's wrong with the mud? And there's that's not a wrong question to ask per se, but I think when it's the only question, we get into trouble.
Uh,
And so it goes back to, okay, what do we know we don't know? And the big question with like hole issues is, what do we know we don't know about the formations we're drilling through? Are they time sensitive? Are they, is this typical? Have we looked at offsets? What are the things, and what are things that we know we have not measured? Where it's like, hey, do you have a log on this? No, I don't. I didn't measure that because we drill these all the time. Okay, so we don't have certain information that could tell us whether it is or not, right? And then what are the things this is classic, like, Donald Rumsfeld sort of made these phrases famous. And then the unknown unknowns, right? What do we don't know? We don't know. And it's difficult to name that. But from a sort of root cause analysis, when I want to break down a problem, I feel like a lot of times the conversation starts with, we've decided there's something wrong with the mud, and what are you going to do to fix it?
yeah.
And as a service provider who wants to, help our customers, if we are only looking at the mud because our job is to either find a solution that is mud related or prove that it isn't the problem, it's a very like one-dimensional way to attack these things. And so if we're able to share more information, say, hey, let's look at some EDR data and see,
Yeah.
like, what are the stresses we're putting, like, what is our ECD swing? Or do we have really high instantaneous ROP and then we slow down? Is that stressing the wellbore? Oh, gee, we're seeing a lot of, it looks like you have a bunch of whirl. Are we beating up the formation? And those are things that everybody can have a conversation about, and say, okay, could these things be related? The fact of the matter is, a lot of times, there's no way to prove one way or the other. But the general assumption is, oh, well, this could be the only thing, doesn't account for all the things that we don't know,
Yeah.
right? Um, so we obviously want to feel in control. We want to know what we control. But from an engineering perspective, um, and this requires we've been very fortunate to have some very generous customers who said, you know what, we want to get to the bottom of this too, and share information. Because sometimes, look, I'll be honest, like, let's say we're having a problem and the mud's out of spec. The mud may be out of spec and we're treating it and getting it back in shape, but that may not be the root cause either. Just because we're not in program doesn't mean, it could be, and we need to talk about that too, for sure.
Yeah.
But when customers are generous with their data and what they're willing to provide us, we can take a close look, and we can maybe rule out more things, or at least ask better questions, um, and circle back with the drilling engineers who are, kind of looking at 30,000 foot most of the time, um, and just have a really productive conversation about a true engineering problem. Um, and so that's something I'm sort of seeing the contrast of, hey, let's have this conversation and get everybody together. And then I'm seeing the, like, hey, fix it. And the fact is, in both situations, we want to fix it, even if it's not our fault.
Yeah.
We want to help.
Yeah.
Guess what? Our costs look better, and we have, if we fix a problem that isn't our fault, guess what? Our wells perform better, and our customers want to use us more.
Right.
So, I think an element of just a lot of that drilling related data holistically. And sometimes this has been helpful where, like, automated mud measurement actually comes into the picture, or we have data streams right next to all the other things, and we can look at those relationships.
Yeah.
And other times it requires a bit more, okay, let's dig a little deeper. What could or could not have happened? But I guess that's just sort of the, almost when we get into this, like, thought of the day. It's like, man, I love rolling up my sleeves and getting down and solving a problem. And if I just have a little bit more information, wow, it changes the game as far as how we might be able to help, um, and really solve the problem. So, I've said it before, but I thought now is the time, relative to, if you talk about monthly trends, that's that's the one that's been big in our book.
Sure. No, and I think it's an interesting conversation because, you're taught at such a young point in your career, the running joke is there's two things that go in the hole: steel and mud. And, one's really hard to mess up. And one doesn't really change, right? And so when you look at steel, it's hard to mess up steel, as they say. And, so it's got to be something. And I think because there are so many things that subsurface you can do to alter what's going on, that it's easy to just say, well, there's got to be something you can add, or there's got to be something going on down there that I can't really see. But as the mud people, you guys know or should know what's going wrong, so fix it. Because it's not like you can just all of a sudden start tweaking the BHA real time. And so, but then on top of that, you're dealing with chemistry and you're dealing with 100 different factors at one time. So it's hard to pinpoint what it could be, but knowing there's so many unknowns, it's like there's got to be something that the mud can do to help with this problem. I think it's just sort of it's just, I don't want to say an easy sort of fallback, but it kind of is at the same time, because it's not like you're, most people, even on the mud side, aren't geologists, PhD chemists, whatever else comes into play, rock mechanics, to be able to just identify exactly what's going on because you can't get out of the hole. You know what I mean? But it is, again, it's fair to say, okay, let's go back and do our due diligence to make sure we, we're consistent on treatments and we didn't have any major fluctuations. But to your point, we're one of the only services that doesn't have like a real-time fingerprint on what's going on. Like besides, like, I don't know another service line that's on a rig that you can't really check most real-time information to make sure that you're supposed to be doing is actually being done correctly.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it okay, a drill bit. There's obviously something like, hey, your drill bit is beat up I mean, so Fred Dupriest would kind of harp on this a lot. He would say, look, the compressive strength of a diamond cutter these days is like so many orders of magnitude more than your rock you're drilling through, that for a cutter to break off, it is not because the rock is too abrasive. Like, that is not the reason. It's when you're loading up your BHA because you have stick slip, and that thing, bites in, gets wound up, and then that energy gets released, and it smacks against the rock. That's what's chipping off your cutter. So is that because you have a bad quality bit? Or is that because of the associated drilling dynamics and, MSE optimization and that sort of thing? Now, if you're, on the bit side, you probably get access to a lot of that information, and you have a bunch more evidence where you can not only show the EDR data, but you have pictures and you say, look, here's another one where you saw the exact same thing. Here's some best practices to consider. So you should be able to see the dysfunction on a data logger. And so those are things like there's a playbook there. Fluids is a much broader, more ambivalent. And look, I mean, I got to empathize with, some of these folks in it to a greater extent. If I'm handling 30 vendors and they're all trying to tell me how great they are, and look, sometimes like it is a mud problem. Let's not look past that. And then the other part of it is, as somebody who's scared of getting run off or afraid of, the implications of that, how many times do you risk minimizing it, or, oh, it's not us? And it's like, well, come on now, and so that comes down to the service company. And, I hope the trust is, takes a long time to build. It's very easy to break. But I hope that's what we're trading in, is trust, where you can say, look, we'll take a look at it. And if we think there's a problem, we'll own up to it. And if there isn't, we'll present why we don't think it is, but we'll still try and solve the problem.
Right.
Because we want your well to succeed. So I think there's that big picture thing where it's like, look, I've had vendors tell me it's not their fault all the time. Like, what makes you different or special?
Sure.
And I think that's where trust and problem solving, comes in. And I don't know if everybody can do that perfect all the time. So,
well, and I wonder, and it'd be interesting at some point maybe to interview a drilling engineer who's had several years' experiences. Do you kind of go into a new campaign sort of guilty until proven innocent? You know what I mean? Or are you like, hey, we're a strong partnership right from the jump, and I'm going to have trust? And I would imagine that it's like, well, you need to gain my trust. I mean, because I've seen it. Like, typically when you gain a new customer and everyone's kind of getting to know each other, you're often asked more about things that seem obvious than you would 2 or 3 years down the road. I've had a customer that I've had now since I think 2014, and they'll go to bat for me all the time without even having to do a bunch of due diligence, because I've gained their trust, and as a service company, AES has done more than they probably could have ever asked to make sure that we provide them with the best service quality possible. And so, unless it's obvious, but what I'll obviously do is, if I think something's wrong, I'll go to that gentleman first and foremost before he starts questioning me. And so over the years, you do gain a level of trust, like you said, but it's oftentimes difficult. I went through a bidding process and with a drilling engineer, and the way he was describing how he wanted the bid structured, I eventually asked him, I said, to me, honestly, no disrespect, Mr. So-and-so, but it sounds to me like you have major vendor trust issues. And I think it caught him off guard, and he paused and he said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, that's going to make it very difficult for a company like us to work with you and expect, XYZ right from the get-go. And so, we'll put our best foot forward. And, unfortunately, we didn't get the work, but talking to other vendors that work for that company, they said it's extremely challenging. And so that would just be a terrible environment to work in if you're constantly working against the trusted, or working against that sort of philosophy coming from your customer. How do you overcome that? I don't know. Maybe, I'm assuming this gentleman got burned early on in his career, and now it's, trust no one.
Well, I mean, I think we have certainly had to fight that battle periodically. I mean, there's a narrative of like, oh, hey, look, they're just trying to get more money out of you, and and look, it's very difficult to quantify value, right? Normally, it's sort of like you go with the absolute, nobody gets fired for saying, well, I tried to have an even bid and I went with the cheapest, right? Well, the cheapest may not include some other things may be missing, but how do you prove that, right? And then there's the like, oh, well, I gave you the price because you're the lower bid, and then you came back and immediately asked for a price increase. So there's nickel and diming, or there's all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And so kind of being in the, the middle of the road on pricing has normally been like, that's not our game. And guess what? We're going to end up costing less probably because our stuff is written out, as opposed to some of these surprises, or wait, that's not included. And but I mean, it's also like with the amount of pressure to just try and get the work, I'm not shocked that service companies would do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Is try and win the work and get your money back somehow, right? It's I get it. But when circling back to, how somebody perceives that, it says, look, I awarded you this work because you said you could do it at this price. And immediately, like, what are we doing?
Yeah. No, and I'll be honest, like that early on, I was, there was a period where I wouldn't say there was desperation, but it was kind of like, we never won this and let me try something different. And I got myself stuck in that situation. And it wasn't great. Fortunately we got ourselves out of it, and it ended up being a good campaign. And it was only a handful of pads, so it wasn't like long term. Fortunately, made good relations with the drilling engineer, but I had to defend myself for several months before they realized, oh, okay, well, maybe there was a misjudgment because you hadn't drilled in this area or what have you, but it's not a good place to be. And so it was a good learning lesson, and I haven't done that again. But people, it happens.
Yeah, I mean, the more we talk about this, the more like I'd love to have a really cynical drilling engineer just tell us, oh, hey, look, here are the times I got burned. Like, we know it's happened.
Yeah.
And here are the reasons that, trust, I have these trust issues or what have you. But I think the really constructive place when you're really humming is you have those relationships. You can come forward and say, hey, I screwed up, and it's not going to be, you will never work for me again. It's like, well, what are you going to do to fix it? Oh, good. You already have a plan. Like, just those kinds of things where there's permission to make mistakes as opposed to pressure to minimize them.
Right.
Creates a lot more candor and just a lot more like good faith. But I think you have seen when incentives are misaligned. I mean, this goes throughout the history of corporations. When incentives are misaligned, or people are afraid if they don't do something, they're going to lose their jobs, they tend to do things based upon what they think the metrics are, and it's not being caught, or, or those kinds of things. And so I just, I hope that we can have better discussions with all this data we're sitting on, holistically, with everybody who's got skin in the game.
Right.
And that just provides like sort of a multidimensional approach that, helps us forever onwards. Where I think we find ourselves bogged down in a lot of mud problems that may or may not be a mud problem, and everybody just forgets about it if the next well goes okay. And it's like, no, wait, like what if we looked at the whole thing? And so I don't know. I hope we can be really constructive and look at these things as engineers. I don't know if they're like, I don't know if it'd be cool if a drilling engineer put together like a worksheet or like a playbook. It's like, okay, we had a problem. Here's everybody I'm looking at, and here's the questions I want answered.
Yeah.
and we go through that big picture data set that, we didn't have access to 10, 15 years ago.
That's
It
true.
was nowhere near as good, right? Like I remember having EDR access and like you could see a few things, but now the way you can visualize it, overlay things, I mean, we've just been able to provide our customers such better service when we can look at those things. So
Yeah. No, great discussion. And if anyone out there, especially on the drilling side, or maybe you're a former drilling engineer and you don't feel like if you say something wrong, you're going to get reprimanded, hit us up. We'd love to have you come in, or, we could do a Zoom. But nonetheless, interesting conversation, one that's very dynamic, and one that, internally we discuss all the time. If you have any stories or thoughts, or if you'd like to add anything, please hit us up. You can reach us out on LinkedIn, or you can hit us up at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Be sure to check out our tech tips. Again, that's falls under the YouTube channel. We've got all our podcasts on YouTube now. For all the video, website again is updated. We did that not too long ago. It's great, ton of good information. And I think that is all, Matt. Any other outlets or any cool events coming up? I know this will probably drop after, I'm assuming, but it'd be cool to recap the ADE.
yeah, we'll run through that. I mean, I think I don't know, April's going to be busy.
Yeah.
May's going to hopefully be busy too.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so much is going to happen probably between now and then. Look forward to another belated update.
Yeah. That sounds good. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.